So today we're talking about the legendary Sennheiser HD600 dynamic driver moving coil headphones. And I'm going to tell you why in 2023, this is still one of the best headphones that you can buy at its price point. It's actually kind of crazy if you think about it. This thing came out in 1997, and all these years later, it's still one of the best headphones for a particular kind of sound, and I'll get into that. But just right out of the gate here, I'm going to say that this is still to this day one of the more referencey neutral styles of tuning that you can get. Now, I do also want to highlight some limitations and compromises that it has, and also compare it to some of the other headphones that I think you should also consider if you're looking for a neutral reference set. But, for me, this is still one of the best ones out there. And I realized I'd never really done a review of these, so I figured why not do one. So let's get into it. You'll see this headphone listed at around $450, but you can regularly get it on sale for around $300. As an example right now, this one is $299 on headphones.com. And as a disclaimer, that's where this unit is from. But of course, all thoughts and opinions here are my own as usual, and nobody has paid me to say anything in particular about this headphone. And for those who might be new to this channel, I do like to do a more technical analysis of headphones. And so we will definitely be diving into that with this one as well. But let's go over the non-sound related stuff first. Just so you guys are aware, this is not the marble countertop version. That one is like, it's a cult classic. It looks gaudy as f***. And I know some people hate me for not liking the marble countertop version, but I'm going to own that. You guys are crazy. This looks so much better. I'm sorry. Just make sure if you have the marble countertop version that you get fired up and post in the comments. But this one, it looks super classy, very simple, very no nonsense, of course. It has a little bit of cup swivel here, and it does have some tilt. And of course, there have been revisions to this headphone over the years. When it comes to the build quality, this is definitely sturdier feeling than the HD 560S, so the more entry-level headphone from Sennheiser. But it is still plastic, right? So we're not talking about any premium feeling materials. However, these are known for their reliability, their sturdiness over time. They do hold up. And so that shouldn't be an issue, the fact that it's made out of plastic. The other nice thing about the fact that it's made out of plastic is that it is also very lightweight. It's very similar to the HD 650 and the others that are in this line. I believe there's actually a difference in clamp force between these and some of the newer ones like the HD 660 S2 and things like that. But it's difficult to tell because over time they do wear, like they do stretch out as they wear in a little bit. Let me just show you what it looks like when I put it on. I'm doing that now. You can see it's got a bit of extension, and it's basically everything that you'd expect. If you're used to the HD 650 or other headphones in this series, the HD 6 series, it wears basically like that. It's quite snug initially. It loosens a bit over time, and then it does get very comfortable. They sort of disappear because they're very lightweight. Still, I am going to nitpick it because that's just what I do. These are a little clampy for me, even after stretching them out. It's just a little clampy. It's a clampy boy. Now for the connectors, they do use their proprietary plug, which is sort of like a little 2-pin kind of design. Not 2-pin like in IEMs, but kind of like this, right? You see this here. And I'm not a fan of the proprietary nature of those designs, but they are functional. They do make it so that it doesn't immediately just pop out, which can be a good or a bad thing depending on how you use your headphones. But I think we're used to it at this point, and they're fairly common because these headphones are basically everywhere. One other thing is that the pads do wear over time, and they do change the sound. When you have worn pads, say pads that are used, over a year or so, it will have an effect on the sound if you compare that to brand new fresh pads, and we can demonstrate that fairly easily with the measurements. So I do suppose that that's a little bit of a downside where over time you may have to replace the pads, or you may want to replace the pads, in particular if you are trying to get the same treble response. But some people actually prefer a more relaxed treble response, and just leaving it with worn pads is actually preferable. So just keep that in mind. Now, as far as drivability is concerned, these are 300 ohm headphones, so they are fairly high impedance. It's not one where you need anything crazy for an amplifier. You never really do, but it is still something that I recommend using an amplifier with, especially if you want to listen at louder volumes. For reference, I've been using this mostly off the SPL Phonator X, but then also the THX AAA1, just so you guys have a sense of what I'm running it with. Okay, so that's the non-sound related stuff. out of the way, let's now talk about the sound quality of this one. And if you guys are looking for a comparison between this one and the HD650 and 660S and S2, I'll try and do like a full comparison of all of them that are in this line. So stay tuned for that video, or consider subscribing. Imagine that. Okay, let's talk about the sound. Now, this is really where the HD600 shines, and I'm going to throw the graphs up on the screen here, and in particular, we're going to look at the measurements done here on the B&K 5128. If you guys are looking for gross data on this one, I've done that as well. That'll be linked in the description as usual. But here I'm showing you both raw and compensated data. So you can see here that for most of its frequency response, the Sennheiser HD600 is one of the more neutral sounding headphones, one of the more neutral measuring headphones out there. And actually, for the mids and for the treble, the HD600 is probably the best measuring headphone that I've come across, or at least one of them. And that's also quite interesting because we're using here a tilted diffuse field head-related transfer function for the reference point. So the reason why we need to show it like this is we measure headphones at the eardrum. And the reason why we measure headphones at the eardrum is because headphones are worn on the head. They couple to the side of the head. And that means that they have particular interactions with the ear and with the side of the head. They don't just, sit in on a stand in a room the way a speaker might. And so because of that, we need to include those variables, the effects of the ear, the headphone to ear transfer function. And that's why you see it at the eardrum reference point rather than, just if you were to put a microphone in front of the transducer here, right? That's not going to work because if you were to put a microphone in there, that wouldn't include, your actual, a person's actual ear that should go in there when it's being actually worn in practice. So we use these measurement systems that are meant to simulate a head and an ear and an ear canal, and so have all those various different features. And that's why you see the rise here, and we call this ear gain, essentially. Now, why is diffuse field being tilted like this? Well, it's because this tilt, the bass to treble delta, is what most people end up preferring for overall sound signature. This is really where the preference element comes in. Some people prefer brighter sound signature. Some people prefer a warmer sound signature or more bass. But somewhere in that range, we aim for around 10 dB here because that's kind of in the middle. So as I mentioned, the HD600 is one of the more neutral sounding headphones, neutral measuring headphones that you can find out there. But there is a deficiency, of course, with this headphone, and it is in the bass. So with the HD600 and the HD650, they both roll off a bit in the bass, and especially in the sub bass. You really don't have any sub bass going on with these. So most of the bass is present in the mid bass and above. Also, if you try and bring back some of that bass or elevate the bass, the sub bass with EQ, you are going to run into some harmonic distortion issues if you boost it too much. It can take a little bit, but not too much. You don't want to go, super crazy with the bass boost on these. Also interesting to note is that there does seem to be a little bit of a forward character there in the mid bass, or mid to upper bass. So right at around 150 hertz, there's a little bit of an emphasis there, but that's okay. I think that's totally fine given how the rest of this headphone measures. One thing I'd like to point out here with the measurements is that you can see there's an 8 kilohertz peak or around 8 kilohertz. That I expect is just a similar kind of feature to what you get with the canal entrance resonance that you see on the Gross systems. So a dip at around 9 kilohertz on the Gross systems. It's going to take a little bit for people to get used to reading that, but that's what I've observed here. And if you want to see a comparison with the Gross, that is linked in the description. But apart from the bass response, the HD600 is objectively one of the best headphones for that reference kind of sound. Again, if you prefer a bassier, warmer sound, this is not going to be the headphone for you. If you prefer a brighter, treble boosted sound, this is not going to be the headphone for you. If you prefer a V-shaped kind of sound with bass and treble, this is not going to be the headphone for you. This headphone is what you end up going for if you're looking for that more even keel, neutral kind of sound signature, because it does that very, very well. Now, that's the objective stuff. Let's talk about the subjective stuff now. How does this sound? What's the experience like? To me, this headphone subjectively sounds very natural. It sounds balanced, but also it sounds very detailed and well separated for the images. Its weakness for the subjective qualities is that the soundstage is a bit more on the intimate side of things. It is not that super spacious kind of sound that you get with something like the HD800S, or actually a lot of other headphones are more spacious than these. That's not its strength. but the sense of image separation and control and the finer little nuances, being able to hear all that stuff, the detail, the resolution, all of that stuff is great. All the subjective audiophile qualities are great. And the only other one that I'm going to say is not that great on this is that sense of dynamics and impact is really not there with this. At least I don't get it with this. That's okay, right? I don't really expect that too much with this. You know, if I'm looking for that quality specifically, maybe I'm looking at something else, maybe even a closeback. But I think that there's trade-offs and concessions that you'd have to make it around this price. Now, let's quickly talk about some of the stuff that this competes with. This is going to compete directly with the Hi-Fi Man Sundara because that's also a more neutral leaning headphone. They do things a little differently. The HD600 sounds a little bit more natural. However, the Sundara has better bass extension. It's actually got a bit of a bass boost towards the sub bass, even though it rolls off below 30 hertz as well. But I'll overlay the graphs here so you guys can take a look and see which one is more closer to what you're after. I tend to think that where the HD600 is a little forward in the mids, the Sundara is a little relaxed. So right at around 1K, 1.5K, the 600s tend to be a bit more present there, and the Sundara is a bit withdrawn there. Even more so withdrawn on some of the other Hi-Fi Men headphones, like the Edition XS, for example. That can have an effect on the perception of soundstage, so spaciousness. And in my view, it's for that reason that the Sundara doesn't sound quite as intimate as the HD600 does. But I do also feel that the HD600 is a little bit more balanced throughout the treble. So between the two, I think it's a really tough call. On the one hand, I do prefer the natural kind of presentation that you get with the Sennheiser, but the Sundara definitely has the bass extension advantage. And if you want to do EQ, the Sundara is probably going to be your better bet, especially in the bass. If you're going to be boosting up the bass, the Sundara would be the way to go there. And also don't sleep on the HE560 that I reviewed not that long ago, or at least I compared it to the Sundara. That one is also going to be good for getting into EQ. With the Sennheiser, with this one, it's not really necessary to get into EQ at all, I feel. But I do still EQ it. So essentially what I did is I made a couple of adjustments there in the treble, and then I boosted the bass just a little bit. I didn't go overboard. I didn't match the target because, again, I'm a little bit cautious of going too far there because the driver here can only handle so much before it gets into harmonic distortion territory. And one other headphone to consider around this price for a similarly excellent kind of sound signature that does have a bass boost is the Audeze Maxwell. And I know that's a totally different headphone. It's meant for a totally different kind of market. But I do think that the frequency response, like the overall tonal balance of the Maxwell, is not that far off from the Sennheiser for the upper mids and treble, so the ear gain. It's not quite as refined. It's got a couple of extra quirks here and there compared to the HD600, but with the Maxwell, you get that bass boost. So if you're looking for that kind of sound signature, that might be better, but it is also heavier. And so I do personally prefer the HD600. But that's basically all I have to say about the Sennheiser HD600. This is a legendary headphone for a very good reason. It's one of the best that you can buy at around its asking price. It's one of the most neutral, balanced reference kind of sound signatures you can find, depending on your preference for, bass to treble delta. Maybe you want a bassier sound, in which case this probably isn't going to be for you. But, for me, if I'm looking for that normal, natural kind of presentation, the HD600 is definitely high up on that list. Compared to the Sundara, if I had to choose between the two, it's a really tough call. I don't really have a strong preference between the two, but I do think the Sundara offers a little bit more EQ potential, but the default tonality and frequency response of the HD600 is a little bit more natural. So that's kind of how I think about it. If you're going to get into EQ, probably Sundara, but if you are not going to, I think the HD600 is probably going to be a bit better. That basically does it for this video. That's all I have to say about the HD600. It's awesome. I love it. And it just goes to show that, new products that come out in audio, they're not necessarily better than the old ones. Some of them are maybe, but certainly not all of them, because this is still, I think, a leading contender at around its asking price. It seems that there's still a lot of work for a lot of other companies to do to be able to truly dethrone the HD600. I've said this before on live streams, but I really want companies to try and make something like the HD600, just with full bass extension. Give me that. I will be very happy. If anybody can do that, I'll be happy. But that does it for this video. Once again, if you're interested in any of our written reviews, that's up on the audio files linked in the description up on headphones.com. Also, for any of the additional data on this headphone, that'll be linked in the forum thread below. Plus, check out our Discord. That's where I'll be hanging out. That's where you can argue with me about all kinds of various different things related to audio, gear, etc., measurements. You get the idea. And that is basically it for me. I will cease stumbling over my words here, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.